My name is Joshua. I'm 28 years old, and my parents left me to die in a hospital because my brother needed a ride home from the dog park. Before I tell you what was in the letter that made their whole world crumble, let me know where you're listening from in the comments below. It feels good to know there's a world out there beyond the four walls I grew up in. It all started with a phone call. Not a call from me. I was a little busy being unconscious at the time. The call came from a man whose voice was calm, professional, and held the kind of weight that could crack concrete. Dr. Anthony, he said his name was, from the emergency room at St. Jude's Hospital. He told my parents, Charles and Deborah, that I had been brought in unresponsive. My body was in the process of shutting down. The words he used were precise and terrifying. Anaphylactic shock, severe respiratory distress, critically unstable. He made it as clear as humanly possible. You need to come now. We're doing everything we can, but you need to be here. Tonight might be his last. I can picture the scene perfectly. My mother, Deborah, standing in her immaculate kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face for interrupting her evening. My father, Charles, in his favorite armchair, probably lowering his newspaper just enough to glare in the direction of the phone, as if the call itself were a personal inconvenience. There was a beat of silence on their end of the line. Not the silence of shock or grief. It was the silence of calculation. Then my mother's voice, dripping with that syrupy, false concern she had perfected over a lifetime, filtered through the receiver. "Oh my goodness, that sounds just awful," she would have said. "But well, we can't possibly come tonight. I want you to really let that sink in. Their son is dying. A doctor is telling them this is the end." And her response starts with, "But well. Our other son, Caleb, is at that new dog park clear across town with his Samoyed. Snowy," she continued, her voice light, as if discussing a grocery list. "We promised we'd pick him up. The traffic at this hour is just a nightmare. You understand." Dr. Anthony later told my best friend, Andrew, that he was momentarily speechless. He thought it had to be a misunderstanding, a crossed wire. He's an ER doctor. He's seen the worst of humanity, but this was new. So he pressed, "Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't think you grasp the severity of the situation. Your son may not survive the night. He needs his family." That's when my father's gruff voice must have taken over the call. I can hear him now, the impatience rattling in his throat. "We heard you. We'll try to check in tomorrow." Then the click of the line going dead. They never came. The night passed, then a day, then another, a full week. 7 days of machines breathing for me, of 4 lines pumping life-saving drugs into my veins, of nurses who barely knew me treating me with more compassion than my own blood. I woke up alone. I recovered alone. And in that silence, in that sterile white room where the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, something in me finally broke. Or maybe it finally fixed itself. Finally, on the 8th day, Charles and Deborah decided to grace the hospital with their presence. They must have rehearsed their worried expressions in the car ride over. They probably practiced the breathless rush into the room, the tearful explanation about traffic or work or stress. But when they pushed open the door to room 304, they found nothing but a void. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets tucked with military precision. The room was sterile, silent, and empty. The monitors were off. The 4-pole was bare. Where my head should have been, resting on the crisp white pillow, was a single plain envelope. No name on it, just a white rectangle stark against the hospital linen. My father, impatient as always, likely snatched it up. My mother would have wrung her hands, her performance of anxiety kicking into high gear for an audience of none. They opened it and read it together, standing in the chilling silence of the room where their son had fought for his life alone. A male nurse named Gabriel, a guy who had become my silent ally during those long nights, watched from the doorway. He described it to me later. The color left my mother's face first. A sudden, stark white, like a sheet thrown over furniture. My father's face went the other way, a blotchy, dangerous red that climbed up his neck until a vein pulsed in his temple like a trapped worm. The letter wasn't a son's cry for help. It wasn't a plea for understanding. It was a meticulously crafted weapon, and they had just walked right into its path. To understand that letter, and why it devastated them so completely, you have to understand the 28 years of evidence I had collected. You have to understand that this wasn't just about one night in a hospital. This was about a lifetime of being invisible. You see, in the constellation of our family, my brother Caleb was the sun. He was the golden center around which everything orbited. My parents were the planets, basking in his warmth. And me? I was just a piece of space debris, drifting in the cold, dark outer rim. I lay in that hospital bed for those 7 days, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them over and over. 144 tiles. I had plenty of time to think. I replayed every memory, every slight, every moment I had made an excuse for them. I thought about the nurse, Gabriel. On my 3rd night, when the pain was bad, he sat by my bed for an hour after his shift ended. He didn't have to do that. He talked to me about baseball, about the weather, about anything to keep my mind off the fact that my lungs felt like they were filled with cement. "Where are they, Joshua?" he asked me once gently. "Your folks." I couldn't look at him. I stared at the 4-line in my arm. "They're busy," I wheezed. "My brother needed a ride." Gabriel didn't say anything. He just adjusted my blanket. But I saw the look in his eyes. It was pity and anger. That was the moment the seed was planted. That was the moment I realized that love isn't about blood. It's about showing up. And my parents? They hadn't shown up for me in 28 years. The hospital discharged me on a Tuesday morning. I signed the papers with a shaky hand. My legs felt like jelly, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. I didn't call them. I didn't ask for a ride. I called Andrew, my best friend. Andrew was there in 20 minutes. He didn't ask questions. He just loaded my bag into his car, helped me into the passenger seat, and drove. "You're staying with me," he said. It wasn't a question. "As long as you need." We drove past the exit for my parents' house. I didn't even look out the window. I was done looking back. But before I left that hospital room, I left the letter. I spent hours writing it. My hand cramped, but I didn't stop. I poured every ounce of pain, every memory, every truth I had swallowed for decades onto those pages. It was my testimony. It was my verdict. And it was my sentence. Because the letter didn't just say goodbye. It contained a secret. A secret about money, about inheritance, about the one thing my father loved more than his golden child, his assets. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To truly understand the weight of that letter, you have to go back. You have to see the cracks in the foundation before the house fell down. You have to see the little boy standing in a gymnasium, holding a blue ribbon, waiting for parents who were never looking at him. You have to go back to a memory so sharp it still feels like it happened yesterday. I was 10 years old. The air in the school gymnasium was thick with the smell of floor wax and the electric buzz of 100 kids high on sugar and accomplishment. It was the district science fair. I was holding a first-place ribbon. The blue was a shocking, beautiful color against my sweaty palm. My project was a masterpiece of 5th-grade engineering, a working model of a volcano, but not the simple baking soda kind. I had built a cross-section showing the magma chamber, the vents, the tectonic plates. I had spent weeks on it, staying up late with a flashlight under my covers to glue the papier-mâché. It didn't just bubble. It erupted on command, a controlled flow of red-dyed vinegar and foam that wowed the judges. It was glorious. I didn't walk home that day. I floated. The ribbon was my trophy, my proof. "See," it said. "I'm here. I matter. I did something good." I burst through the back door of our house, my voice a high-pitched yell. I did it. I won. Mom, Dad, I got first place. They were in the backyard. Their backs were to me. All their focus, all their energy, was a laser beam pointed at my 4-year-old brother, Caleb. He was on a shiny new bicycle with training wheels, his face a mask of concentration, his little legs pumping furiously. My dad, Charles, was jogging beside him, one hand hovering over the back of the seat, a constant stream of encouragement flowing from his mouth. You got it, son. That's it. Look at him go, Deborah. My mom was a few feet away, documenting the historic event with a giant camcorder, narrating his every wobble for a future audience. Look, I tried again, stepping onto the patio, holding the ribbon up higher as if its altitude would make it more visible. First place, in the entire school. My mother, without taking her eye from the viewfinder, waved a dismissive hand in my general direction. That's wonderful, Joshua. Shoo, not so loud. You'll make your brother lose his focus. She zoomed in on Caleb. You're doing it, sweetie. Look at you. Oh, Robert, did you see that? He almost had it. A moment later, Caleb veered sharply to the left. He wasn't going fast, maybe 2 miles an hour, and he tipped over into a large azalea bush. It was a soft landing. He didn't even hit the ground hard. But the world stopped. My parents rushed to him as if he'd been shot. The bike was pulled away. Kisses were administered. A tiny, barely visible scratch on his knee was inspected with the gravity of a battlefield triage unit. Oh, my poor baby, my mother cooed, gathering him into her arms. Are you okay, Charles? Get the first aid kit. My glorious blue ribbon felt like a piece of trash in my hand. I stood there on the patio, watching them fuss over a scratch that didn't even bleed, while my victory turned to ash in my mouth. I quietly went to my room, shut the door, and placed the ribbon on my desk. It sat there for weeks, a curling, dusty monument to the day I learned the fundamental law of our family's physics. All attention, all praise, all love orbited the sun that was Caleb. I was just a distant, cold planet. This wasn't a one-time event. It was a pattern woven into the fabric of our lives. When I was in high school, I was a swimmer. I wasn't naturally gifted, but I was disciplined. I was up every morning at 4:30 a.m., smelling of chlorine before the sun was up. I pushed my body because in the water, silence was normal. In the water, I was in control. The hard work paid off when I qualified for the state championship my junior year. It was the biggest meet of my life. My parents promised they would be there. They even bought a new banner to hang on the bleachers. The morning of the meet, Caleb woke up with a sniffle. Not a fever, not the flu, a sniffle. My mother took his temperature. It was normal, but she declared he was coming down with something and needed round-the-clock care. We can't leave him, Joshua, she said, her hand feeling Caleb's cool forehead. He needs us. But Mom, I pleaded, standing in the kitchen in my team warm-ups. It states, you promised. You've always been the strong one, Joshua, she said, turning her back to me to pour Caleb some orange juice. You're so independent. You'll be fine. Take care of yourself. You've always been the strong one. That wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. It was a job description. And the job description was simple. Take care of yourself because all our resources are allocated elsewhere. I swam my heart out that day. I placed third in the state. I stood on the podium, water dripping from my hair, and looked up at the stands. I saw the other parents cheering, waving signs, hugging their kids. I saw the empty space where my family should have been. I accepted the medal, felt heavy and cold against my chest. I built a fortress of self-sufficiency around my heart, believing that if I asked for nothing, I could never be disappointed. But disappointment is a funny thing. It's a leaky faucet. You can ignore it, but eventually, it will flood the whole house. The fortress I'd built began to crumble when I was 16. It started subtly, a fatigue that wasn't just tiredness. It was a leaden weight in my bones, a series of strange, migrating rashes, a deep, aching pain in my joints that felt like an old man's arthritis. I tried to hide it. Being sick was not an option in my family. It was a form of weakness, and worse, an inconvenience. But you can't hide your body's betrayal forever. One morning, I couldn't get out of bed. The pain was so intense that the simple act of swinging my legs to the floor felt like climbing a mountain. My mother's reaction was not concern, but irritation. "Joshua, you have a calculus exam today. You can't just not feel like it." It took 3 more episodes like that, and a call from the school nurse after I nearly passed out in class, for them to finally take me to a doctor. The journey to a diagnosis was a long maze of appointments, blood tests, and specialists. I mostly went alone. My parents were always stuck in a meeting or had to take Caleb to soccer practice. Finally, the diagnosis came from a rheumatologist, Dr. Jonathan. A severe autoimmune disorder. My immune system was attacking my own healthy tissues. We all sat in Dr. Jonathan's office as he explained this. I watched my parents' faces. I saw no fear for my health. No wave of parental protectiveness. I saw my father's jaw tighten as he processed the financial implications. His first question, cutting the doctor off mid-sentence, was, "So what's the bottom line? How much is this treatment going to set us back?" My mother took a different approach. She put on her martyr face. "Well," she sighed, placing a theatrical hand on my arm. "It's mind over matter, isn't it? Joshua just needs to be tougher. He needs to fight this mentally." Dr. Jonathan looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a physiological condition. It requires medication and lifestyle changes. It is not something he can think away." She smiled a tight, patronizing smile. "We believe in resilience in this family." Life changed. My illness became a line item in the family budget and a frequent topic of their hushed, resentful arguments. "Another $300 for this prescription?" my father would mutter, looking at the bill as if it were a speeding ticket I had gotten on purpose. They weaponized my condition. If I was too tired for a family function, I wasn't sick. I was being antisocial. If I had a food sensitivity, I was being picky. My father, a man who prided himself on never taking a sick day, viewed my illness as a character flaw. One evening, after I had to decline helping him move furniture because of debilitating joint pain, he stood in my doorway. "You know," he said, his voice quiet but sharp as a razor, "people were built differently back in my day. Stronger. You have to fight this thing, Joshua. It's mind over matter. Stop babying yourself." He was telling me my pain wasn't real. He was telling me I was weak. That night I made a vow. They would never see my pain again. I would swallow it down along with my pills. I would become a master of disguise, wearing a mask of perfect health. I would be so strong that I would eventually break. And break I did. But not before they delivered the ultimate betrayal. The great divergence began the spring of my senior year of high school. I'd been accepted to the State University's engineering program. It was a top-tier school, renowned for its rigor. It wasn't an Ivy League, but it was excellent, and for a kid who loved solving problems, it was a dream. With my grades, I had secured some scholarships, but there was still a significant financial gap. I had calculated it down to the penny. It was doable, but I needed help for the tuition. That's when my parents called a family meeting, which was always code for them delivering a unilateral decision. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my achievements had always gone to die. My father, Charles, sat at the head, shuffling papers. He looked like a CEO about to lay off an employee. "Joshua, we've reviewed our assets," he said, the words sterile and rehearsed. "With the economy the way it is, and with Caleb's future to think about, our hands are tied. We won't be able to provide financial support for your tuition." My stomach dropped. I knew they had a college fund. I had heard them talk about it for years. But what about the fund? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. My mother jumped in, her voice a soft, placating murmur. It's not that we don't want to, sweetie, but we have to be realistic. Caleb is, well, he's different. He's going to need more support than you. You're so independent, so capable. We know you'll find a way. Then came the phrase that still haunts me. It'll be a great character-building experience for you, my father said, closing the folder. A man appreciates what he earns. Character building. The two most terrifying words a parent can say to their child when they have the means to help but choose not to. It was a euphemism for "you're on your own." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I nodded, stood up, and went to my room to figure out how to apply for student loans. I built my character, all right. My college experience wasn't one of frat parties and football games. It was a blur of 6 a.m. shifts at a coffee shop, smelling of burnt espresso beans before my first class. It was afternoons spent shelving books in the hushed silence of the campus library. It was late nights delivering pizzas, the smell of grease clinging to my clothes as I tried to study for my thermodynamics exams. I ran on caffeine and sheer, stubborn will. I was constantly teetering on the edge of a flare-up from my autoimmune disease, my body screaming in protest at the relentless pace. But I never told them. I never gave them the satisfaction of knowing I was struggling. I graduated with honors. I secured a great job in a marketing firm before I even had my diploma in hand. I moved into my own apartment, a small, quiet place that felt like a kingdom because it was mine. But the real sting, the twist that made the knife turn in my gut, came a year later. Caleb, the golden child, had barely graduated high school. His GPA was a rounding error. His portfolio consisted of some questionable sketches and a lot of potential. He decided he wanted to go to a private art school in California. The tuition was astronomical, more than my entire 4-year cost of attendance. Suddenly, the family's tied hands were miraculously untied. They cashed out bonds. They took out a second mortgage. They justified it by saying Caleb's creative spirit needed a special environment to flourish. My engineering degree was practical, a trade. His art was a calling. Caleb lasted 1 semester. He came home for Christmas break and never went back. He claimed the professors didn't get his vision. He said the school was too commercial. Did they hold him accountable? Did they tell him to get a job? Did they mention character building? No, they decided he needed a pick-me-up, a reward for having the courage to walk away from something that wasn't right for him. I was sitting in the break room of the warehouse where I was working my third job, a manual labor gig I took on weekends to pay down my loans faster. I was eating a squash sandwich, my muscles aching, checking Facebook on my phone, and there it was, a photo posted by my mother. It showed Caleb, beaming, standing in the driveway. Behind him was a car. Not just any car. It was a vintage Porsche 911. Red, gleaming in the sun. The caption read, "So proud of our Caleb for knowing his own path. Sometimes you have to change gears to find your happiness. Enjoy the new ride. Son, you deserve it." I stared at the screen. The sandwich turned to dust in my mouth. A Porsche. They had bought him a Porsche. I looked at the student loan statement notification that had popped up on my screen 5 minutes earlier. A debt that would follow me for the next 10 years. I looked at the Porsche. The injustice of it was so profound, so absolute, it almost felt comical. I didn't get angry. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The last vestiges of hope I had for their approval curdled and died right there under the flickering fluorescent lights of that break room. I realized then that it wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about value. To them, Caleb was an investment, a prize. I was a cost. I closed my phone. I finished my sandwich. I went back to lifting boxes. I thought I had reached the bottom of their favoritism. I thought the Porsche was the peak of their insanity. But I was wrong. The Porsche was just a warm-up. The real weapon was coming, and it had 4 legs and a wagging tail. For about a year after the Porsche incident, I kept my distance. Our interactions were blessedly superficial. A text on my birthday, a brief phone call on Thanksgiving where I could hear the football game roaring in the background. I was building a life, a career, a sense of self that had nothing to do with them. I was starting to breathe, and then my mother called. Her voice was an octave higher than usual, a sure sign of what she considered to be thrilling news. "Joshua, you are not going to believe the wonderful news. Caleb has a new roommate." I was instantly on guard. "He's getting a roommate? I thought he liked living alone." "Oh, it's not a person, silly." She laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that always set my teeth on edge. "It's a puppy." My stomach tightened. "A dog. The most divine purebred Samoyed you have ever seen. All white and fluffy, like a little cloud." Caleb named him Snowy. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping. "A Samoyed?" "Yes. Isn't that cute?" "Mom, they have a double coat. They are shedding machines. You know I'm allergic." "Oh, Joshua, don't be negative. Caleb has been feeling a bit aimless lately. You know how artists are." And we all agreed that a dog would give him a sense of purpose. It's for his emotional well-being. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emotional well-being. "Mom," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "It's not just allergies. It's the asthma. It's the immune triggers. You know what Dr. Jonathan said years ago? If I'm around that much dander, my throat closes up. It's dangerous." My entire medical file was a testament to this. My specialist had sat them down himself when I was a teenager. He had drawn them a diagram. He had used the words life-threatening. Her response was a puff of air, a complete dismissal. "Oh, Joshua, don't be so melodramatic. It's not like you're living here day to day. You're 30 minutes away. And besides, you can just take a pill. They have wonderful antihistamines these days. You can take a pill." "That means I can never come home again," I stated, the words tasting like ash. "Not for Christmas. Not for your birthday. I can't step foot in that house if that dog is there." "Well, that's a choice you'll have to make, isn't it?" Her voice hardened, the sweetness evaporating to reveal the steel underneath. "We are not going to deny your brother something that brings him so much joy just because of your sensitivity." My sensitivity, like it was a personality quirk, like I had chosen to have a body that tried to kill itself. "Mom, please. There are hypoallergenic breeds. Poodles. Terriers. Why a Samoyed?" "Because that's the one Caleb wanted," she snapped. End of discussion. They had chosen the dog. And in doing so, they had made it perfectly, painfully clear that there was no longer any room in the family for me. I held my ground for 2 months. 2 months of radio silence. I ignored their texts. I let their calls go to voicemail. But then my birthday rolled around. The big 2-8. A text from my mom arrived. "Thinking of you on your special day. We miss you. I'm making your favorite lasagna. Come for dinner on Saturday. Let's not let this silly dog thing come between us." It was a masterfully crafted piece of manipulation. The acknowledgement of my birthday, the mention of my favorite meal, and the minimization of the issue as a silly dog thing. But then came the hook. "We'll put Snowy in the garage while you're here. We promise. The house will be clean. Please, Joshua. It's your birthday." The hopeful, foolish little boy inside me, the one still holding the blue ribbon, whispered, "Maybe she gets it now. Maybe they're trying." Against my better judgment, I accepted. I told myself I would stay for an hour, max. I would be in control. The moment I opened my car door in their driveway, I knew I had been a fool. The smell hit me before I even reached the porch. That faint, musky odor of animal that clings to everything. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. Before I could even ring the bell, it swung open. My mother stood there, beaming, and at her feet, a giant, fluffy white creature, its tail wagging furiously. Snowy. My breath hitched. Mom, you promised. You said he'd be in the garage. Her smile didn't falter. Oh, I couldn't bear to lock him up all alone in the dark. He's part of the family now. Don't worry, I vacuumed. She said, I vacuumed. As if a vacuum cleaner was a match for a Samoyed's dander. Come in, come in. Don't just stand there letting the bugs in. Walking into that house felt like walking into a lion's den. Every surface seemed to be coated in an invisible layer of my own personal kryptonite. My father, Charles, grunted a hello from his recliner, his eyes glued to the golf tournament on TV. Caleb was in the kitchen, cooing at the dog as he gave it a piece of cheese. He glanced at me and I saw it, a flicker of something triumphant in his eyes, a smirk. He knew exactly what this meant. The dinner was torture. I could feel my body starting to react almost immediately. It began as a tickle in the back of my throat. I tried to ignore it. Then my eyes started to itch, a maddening, persistent burn. I surreptitiously popped 2 of my strongest antihistamine pills, praying they would hold back the tide. The conversation, of course, was all about Caleb and the dog. We heard about Snowy's puppy training classes, Snowy's favorite squeaky toy, a hilarious anecdote about Snowy chewing up my father's slippers. My father, who had never once shown interest in my engineering career, was utterly captivated, laughing and asking questions. So, Joshua, my mother said, finally turning to me as she served the lasagna, tell us something interesting. How's that marketing job? The question was a perfunctory afterthought. Before I could answer, I was seized by a coughing fit, a dry, hacking cough that I couldn't stop. I grabbed my water glass, my knuckles white. My mother sighed. The sound was sharp and annoyed. For heaven's sake, Joshua, are you catching a cold? You should really take better care of yourself. It's not a cold, Mom, I rasped, my voice getting hoarse. It's the dog. I'm having a reaction. My chest was getting tight, a familiar and terrifying sensation, like a band was being cinched around my lungs. Oh, stop it, she snapped, her voice losing all pretense of warmth. You are being utterly dramatic. You're fine. You are ruining a perfectly lovely family dinner with all this negativity. Ruining it. I looked around the table. My father was scowling at me, annoyed by the interruption to his meal. Caleb was watching me with that same cold smirk, enjoying the show. I was struggling to breathe, my body screaming warnings at me, and to them I was just a party foul. Killjoy. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. I have to go, I choked out, stumbling to my feet. You haven't even touched your lasagna, my mother said, her voice laced with accusation. After I slaved over it. I didn't answer, couldn't. I just turned and fled out of that house. I fumbled for my car keys, my hands shaking. As I peeled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the dining room window. They were already eating. The ghost had left the table, and no one had even noticed. I drove, gasping for air, the world narrowing to a tunnel. I used my emergency inhaler, the medicine burning my lungs. I made it home, collapsed on my couch, and waited for the reaction to subside. It did, eventually, but the real damage had been done. I thought the worst was over. But with autoimmune conditions, sometimes the initial exposure is just the primer. The real explosion comes later. The next 3 days were a blur. My body felt like a ticking time bomb. A low-grade fever started. The fatigue was bone-crushing. My joints ached with a fiery intensity. But I did what I was trained to do. I pushed through. I minimized. I told myself it was just the after effects and they would pass. I had a huge presentation scheduled for that Friday at work. It was the culmination of a 3-month project, a pitch to land a major new client. My boss, Lincoln, the CEO, was counting on me. My career was my sanctuary. It was the one place where competence and hard work were rewarded. Couldn't fail. Friday morning, I woke up feeling like I was underwater. Every movement was a struggle. Breathing felt like I was trying to suck air through a wet sponge. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. My face was pale and puffy, with dark circles under my eyes. I spent 20 minutes in a hot shower trying to steam my lungs open. I put on my best suit, a dark navy armor to hide the crumbling infrastructure beneath. As soon as I walked into the office, my friend and colleague, Andrew, took one look at me and his usual cheerful expression vanished. "Whoa, Josh, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just bad allergies," I lied, my voice sounding weak and thin. "Didn't get much sleep." "Dude, it's more than that," he insisted, stepping closer. "You're wheezing. I can hear it from here. You need to go home or to a doctor." Our biggest competitor in the office, a guy named Hunter who had been eyeing my promotion, sauntered by. "Toughing it out, Thompson? Don't choke during the pitch," he said with a smug grin. The comment, meant to be a jab, was terrifyingly close to the truth. "I'll be fine," I told Andrew, forcing a confidence I didn't feel. "After the presentation, I'll head home." Somehow I got through the 2-hour meeting. I was on autopilot, running on a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and desperation. I remember the faces of the clients looking at me, nodding. I remember the clicking of my slideshow. The moment the client smiled, shook Lincoln's hand, and left the conference room, the adrenaline evaporated. The world tilted. The conference table rushed up to meet me. I remember putting a hand out to steady myself, my legs turning to jelly. The last thing I saw was Andrew's face, his mouth open in a shout, his eyes wide with terror. Then nothing. I came to in a world of beeps and hushed, urgent voices. An oxygen mask was clamped over my face, forcing air into my starving lungs. Andrew was there, looking pale and scared. "Hey man," he said, his voice shaky with relief. "You're back. You really scared the hell out of me." He filled in the blanks. I had collapsed. My body had gone into full-blown anaphylactic shock. A severe, delayed reaction to the dander exposure combined with the stress. My airway had swollen almost completely shut. The office first aid team had performed CPR until the paramedics arrived and intubated me. Andrew had saved my life. "I tried your parents first," he explained, his brow furrowed with confusion. "Voicemail. I left a message. Said it was a serious emergency. Then I tried your brother. He actually picked up." "What did he say?" I managed to whisper through the mask. Andrew hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He was weirdly casual. Said he was at the dog park with Snowy. I told him you'd collapsed, that you were on your way to the hospital, that it was bad. And he just said, "Huh? Okay, well, I'll shoot Mom and Dad a text." Then he said he had to go. The dog was chasing a squirrel. The casual cruelty of it stole what little breath I had. The dog was chasing a squirrel. A doctor came in then, Dr. Anthony. He explained just how close a call it had been. He said they had to keep me in the ICU for monitoring. "The nurse just got through to your parents," he said, giving my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "We explained the situation. They should be on their way." For a fleeting, stupid moment, I felt a flicker of hope. This had to be it. The rock bottom. The wake-up call that would finally make them see. That hope was systematically dismantled a few minutes later when my nurse, Gabriel, came into my room. He was a big guy with kind eyes. But right now, those eyes were filled with a mixture of professional calm and personal disbelief. "Did you speak to my mother?" I asked, my voice small. He stopped checking the monitors and finally looked at me. He took a deep breath. "Yes, I did. I explained that you were in critical condition and were asking for them. And, I prompted, already dreading the answer. And, your mother told me that it was very unfortunate timing. She said they couldn't possibly come to the hospital tonight. Her words were, "Our other son is at the new dog park across town, and we have to go pick him up afterwards." I closed my eyes. I repeated the urgency, Gabriel continued softly, and your father got on the line. He said, "We heard you. We'll try to check in tomorrow." And then he hung up. The beeping of the heart monitor next to me didn't change its rhythm. Steady, calm. A stark contrast to the way my own heart felt like it was cracking into 1,000 pieces. They weren't coming. They had made their choice. And I, their son, was on one side of the scale, and my brother's ride home from the dog park was on the other. And it wasn't even a close call. The silence that followed was heavy. Andrew, who was sitting in the corner, looked furious. "I'm calling them back. I'm going to scream at them until—" "No," I said. My voice was weak but firm. "Don't." "But Josh." "It's done, Andrew. It's finally done." Those days in the ICU were an awakening. My boss, Lincoln, came to visit. He told me the client had signed. He told me my job was secure. He brought me a card signed by the whole team except Hunter, of course. Mrs. Higgins, my elderly neighbor, somehow found out and had her son drive her to the hospital. She brought me a Tupperware container of soup and held my hand for an hour. These people, my friend, my boss, my neighbor, they showed up. Gabriel, the nurse, became my sounding board. On the 4th night, he told me something that changed everything. "In 20 years of nursing," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "I've learned one thing. The people who are supposed to show up for you are sometimes the last ones to walk through that door. And sometimes they never walk through it at all. You can't force them, Joshua. But you can lock the door. You can lock the door." I realized then that I had been leaving the door unlocked for 28 years, hoping they would come in and love me. All they had done was come in and rob me of my self-worth. It was time to change the locks. "Gabriel," I said, "I need a favor. I need a pen and a lot of paper." He looked at me, a knowing smile touching his lips. "I thought you might." The letter was not written in a fever of rage. It was constructed with the cold, meticulous precision of an architect designing a demolition. For 2 full days I wrote, my hand cramped, the pen feeling both heavy and powerful. I filled 8 pages, front and back. It was my life's thesis, and every word was a citation. I started with the memories. I didn't use vague terms like, "You were mean to me." I painted the scenes in vivid, undeniable detail. I wrote about the blue ribbon on my desk in an empty room while they worshipped Caleb's scraped knee. I wrote about the vacant spot in the bleachers at the state championship. I wrote about the taste of the dry squash sandwich I was eating in a warehouse break room while I looked at a picture of my brother's new Porsche. I wasn't just listing facts. I was presenting evidence of a long, sustained pattern of emotional neglect. I moved on to my health. I quoted my father's words back to him, "Mind over matter." I described the feeling of sitting alone in waiting rooms, of learning to inject myself, of being told my life-threatening illness was dramatic. I recounted the final dinner, the feeling of my lungs constricting while my mother accused me of ruining her evening. Then I brought them to the present, to the hospital room they had never seen. For 7 days, I lay in this bed, attached to machines that were more attentive to my survival than you were. I wrote, "I was told that I might die, and you chose to prioritize a trip to the dog park. There is no excuse, no justification, no spin you can put on that choice. It is the single, purest truth of our relationship, and it has set me free." I laid out the terms of my new life. This letter is not a negotiation. It is a notification. I am officially resigning from my role as your son. I will not be at Christmas. I will not be there for birthdays. I am severing all ties. Do not call. Do not write. Do not try to see me. We are, for all intents and purposes, strangers. And then, I delivered the coup de grace. The part of the letter that I knew would shift their concern from their lost son to their lost assets. The twist that I had held on to for years. A secret weapon given to me by the only person in that family who had ever truly seen me. My grandfather. Before he passed away, Grandpa Thompson had made a promise to me. He saw the dynamic in this family more clearly than anyone. He often told me I reminded him of himself. Quiet, hardworking, resilient. During his last visit, with my Aunt Marie sitting right there as a witness, he told me he wanted me to have the family lake house. It was a beautiful property, 3 hours north. A place of peace. A legacy separate from the main estate. He had never formalized it in his will. A mistake born from the naive belief that his own son, my father, would honor his dying wish. I knew my parents' plan. I knew through Aunt Marie that they were planning to sell the lake house within the month. They needed the cash to provide Caleb with a down payment for a home of his own. The Porsche wasn't enough. The golden child needed a castle. I picked up the pen and pressed down hard. This was my intended inheritance. I wrote. I now know that honor is a concept you don't understand. I am also aware, through Aunt Marie, of your plans to liquidate the lake house to reward Caleb yet again. As of this morning, I have retained a lawyer. His name is Ryan, and he is very aggressive. We have already filed a petition with the probate court to contest the sale and enforce Grandpa's verbal promise, backed by a credible witness affidavit from Aunt Marie. All assets related to the property will be frozen pending a hearing. That house will not be sold to fund Caleb's lifestyle. It will be mine, just as Grandpa intended. I signed my name at the bottom. Joshua. Not your son. Just Joshua. I folded the 8 pages, my hand steady, and sealed them in the envelope. I felt a profound sense of peace. The game was over and I had finally, definitively won. I gave the letter to Gabriel. They'll come eventually, I said. When they do, just give them this. What about you? He asked. I'm checking out, I said. A real smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. I have a promotion to accept and a new life to start. Andrew came to pick me up. As I walked out of the automatic doors of the hospital, the sunlight felt warmer. The air tasted cleaner. I was weak physically, but inside, I felt invincible. I went to Andrew's apartment. I turned off my phone. I slept for 14 hours straight. The silence from my parents continued for another 2 days. They clearly hadn't bothered to check in tomorrow, as my father had promised the doctor. They didn't know I was gone. They didn't know I was alive. Then, on the 3rd day, the storm broke. I turned my phone on. It buzzed continuously for 5 minutes. A frantic dance on the coffee table. A flurry of texts. A dozen missed calls. I didn't answer. I listened to the voicemails. A grim satisfaction settled in my gut as I heard their carefully constructed world begin to unravel. The first was from my mother. Her voice was no longer calm or manipulative. It was a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. Joshua, what is this? What is the meaning of this letter? You've hired a lawyer against your own family? This is blackmail. You call me back this instant. The next one was from my father. His rage was a low, guttural growl. You have no idea what you've done. You think you can just steal our property? My father's house? You are making the biggest mistake of your life. There will be consequences. It was all there. Every word confirmed my decision. There was no apology. No, Joshua, are you okay? No, we were so worried. There was no remorse for their absence. There was only fury at my defiance. Their pain wasn't over losing a son. It was over losing control. It was over losing an asset they had already mentally spent. The lawsuit wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat to their plans for Caleb. They didn't know I was at Andrew's, so I knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up at my apartment. I asked Andrew to come with me a couple of days later so I could pack a suitcase and some important documents. I was planning to find a new place to live immediately. We were in my living room, packing books into boxes, when the pounding began. Not a knock. A frantic, angry pounding on the door that made the frame shake. I looked at Andrew. He just nodded. Silent, "I've got your back." I took a deep breath. I walked to the door, and I opened it. They looked worse than I had ever seen them. My mother, Deborah, usually the picture of suburban perfection with her hair sprayed into an immovable helmet and her makeup flawless, looked like she had been caught in a wind tunnel. Her mascara was smudged under one eye, a dark bruise on her carefully curated face. Her hands were shaking. My father, Charles, was vibrating. That's the only way to describe it. He was a man who prided himself on control, on being the stoic executive, but right now, his face was a map of pure, unadulterated rage. His skin was a dangerous shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging against his collar like ropes straining to snap. "Joshua!" My mother cried out the moment the door cracked open. She lunged forward, arms wide, aiming for a hug. It was a tactical move. I knew it instantly. It was the checkmate hug. A maneuver she had used 1,000 times to physically smother dissent and force intimacy where there was none. If she could just get her arms around me, she could cry into my shoulder, she could turn me back into her little boy, and she could neutralize the threat I had become. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just put a firm hand on her shoulder and held my ground, my arm a rigid iron bar blocking her advance. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was cold enough to freeze the air in the hallway. "Do not touch me." She stopped, stunned, her arms left hanging in the air like broken wings. She looked at my hand on her shoulder as if it were a foreign object. "Joshua, please," she whimpered, her eyes welling up with tears that I knew she could summon on command. "We're your family. We were so worried." "Worried," I repeated, the word tasting like bile. "You were worried about the traffic. You were worried about the dog park. Don't pretend you were worried about me." "What are you doing here?" I asked, looking past her to my father. "What are we doing here?" Charles sputtered, pushing his way in front of my mother, invading my personal space. He smelled of stale coffee and aggression. "We are here to stop this insanity. We are here to talk some sense into you." He tried to push past me into the apartment. "I didn't invite you in," I said, blocking the doorway with my body. "I'm your father," he roared, his voice echoing in the hallway. "I don't need an invitation. Now move aside before you embarrass us further in front of the neighbors." Andrew, who had been standing silently behind me, stepped forward. He crossed his arms over his chest. Andrew is a gym rat, broad-shouldered and imposing. He didn't say a word, he just loomed. Charles hesitated. He looked at Andrew, then back at me. He realized physical intimidation wasn't going to work today. "Fine," Charles spat. "We'll talk here. You think you can just send a letter like that? You think you can just hire a lawyer and freeze our assets? That lake house is family property." "It was Grandpa's property," I corrected him, my heart hammering against my ribs but my voice remaining steady. "And he left it to me. You know that. You were there." "He never wrote it down," Charles yelled, stabbing a finger in my face. "It was a conversation, a casual conversation. It holds no water in court." "That's not what my lawyer says," I replied. "And that's not what Aunt Marie says in her affidavit." The mention of Aunt Marie hit them like a physical slap. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Aunt Marie was her sister, the one person in the family who had always seen through their facade, the one they had marginalized for being difficult. "You dragged Marie into this?" my mother shrieked. "Your own aunt? You're tearing this family apart, Joshua, over a house? Over money?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "It's not about the house, Mom. It's never been about the house. It's about the fact that I almost died last week, and you didn't even show up. We made a mistake, she sobbed, the tears finally flowing freely. We told you. We thought it was just a reaction. We didn't know it was life or death. We are human, Joshua. We make mistakes. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, I said. A mistake is missing a soccer game. Leaving your son to suffocate in an ER because you had to pick up a dog is not a mistake. It's a choice. We were going to come, she insisted, grabbing at my sleeve. We were just delayed. Caleb. He was distraught about the dog being alone, and the traffic was gridlocked and, stop. I cut her off. Just stop lying. Please. For once in your life, just own it. You are being so ungrateful, Charles interjected, his face twisting with disgust. After everything we've done for you, we put a roof over your head. We fed you. We raised you. You did the bare minimum required by law, I shot back. And then you billed me for it emotionally for 20 years. We bought Caleb a Porsche because he needed a win, Charles shouted, the truth about the money finally bubbling to the surface. He was struggling. He needed support. You've always been fine. You have a job. You have a salary. You don't need us. I needed you last Tuesday, I whispered. The anger was fading, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. I needed my dad, and you weren't there. Charles fell silent for a second, but his ego wouldn't let him stay there. You're holding a grudge over one night. You're willing to bankrupt us, to steal your brother's future home, over one night. It wasn't one night, I said. It was the blue ribbon. It was the swim meet. It was the college fund. It was the dog. I looked at my mother. She was weeping into a tissue now, her makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Why? I asked her, the question that had haunted me for my entire life. Why the dog, Mom? You knew. Dr. Jonathan told you. Dr. Rivera told you. You knew a Samoyed was a loaded gun for me. Why did you bring it into the house? Why did you invite me over? She looked up at me, her eyes wide and panicked. She was cornered. She looked at Charles, then back at me. She needed an excuse, a justification, something to make herself the victim again. And in her desperation, she let the mask slip. It's not fair, she wailed, her voice cracking. We didn't know it would be like this. Dr. Rivera told us years ago that there was a chance of a severe reaction, but he said it was rare. He said with medication it could be managed. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hallway went silent. Even the ambient noise of the apartment building seemed to vanish. Andrew sucked in a sharp breath behind me. Years ago, I repeated, the words hanging in the air like toxic smoke. Yes, she cried, thinking she was making a point. He said it was a possibility, not a guarantee. We thought you were stronger than that. You've always been so resilient. We thought you could handle it for a few hours. We didn't think you'd actually collapse. I stared at her. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. You gambled, I said, my voice barely audible. You took a calculated risk with my life. You knew there was a chance, a medical chance, that I could stop breathing. And you decided that Caleb's happiness with a puppy was worth that risk. We didn't think you'd die, she screamed. We just thought you'd get itchy. We thought you'd sneeze. We didn't want to be the bad guys who told Caleb no. So you decided to be the bad guys who killed me instead. The weight of her admission crashed down on them. Charles looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He knew. He had always known. They had discussed it. They had weighed the pros and cons. Pros: Caleb gets a cute dog and stops whining. Cons: Joshua might have a medical emergency. And they had decided the trade-off was acceptable. That's it, I said. The cold calm I had felt in the hospital returned, but this time it was harder, like diamond. That is the closure I needed. Joshua, wait. My father started, his tone shifting from anger to bargaining. We can fix this. We can sell the dog. We can… Get out, I said. Son, be reasonable. The lawsuit, the legal fees, it will destroy your mother. I am not your son, I said. I resigned. Remember. Joshua. My mother lunged again, trying to grab my hand. I stepped back, and Andrew stepped forward, effectively forming a wall. You heard him, Andrew said, his voice deep and threatening. Leave, now, or I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. My father looked at Andrew, then at me. He saw the end. He saw the loss of control, the loss of the asset, the loss of the narrative he had controlled for so long. He sneered, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You're ungrateful, he spat. You're dead to us. I was dead to you a week ago, I replied. I'm just making it official. He grabbed my mother's arm, spinning her around. Come on, Deborah. He's not worth it. Let him have the damn shack. He'll fail without us. He always does. They walked down the hallway. My mother was sobbing loudly, a performance for the neighbors, wailing about how cruel her child was. My father marched stiffly, his back rigid with fury. I watched them go. I watched them turn the corner toward the elevator. I am closing this door, I said, speaking to the empty hallway, to the universe, to myself. Do not come back. Do not contact me again. We are done. I swung the door shut. Click. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It sounded like a gunshot. It sounded like a gavel banging on a judge's podium. It sounded like freedom. I turned around and leaned my back against the door, my legs suddenly shaking so hard they couldn't hold me. I slid down to the floor, burying my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I just shook. Andrew sat down next to me on the floor. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer platitudes. He just sat there, his shoulder pressing against mine, a solid, grounding presence in a world that had just shifted on its axis. They knew, I whispered into my hands. Andrew, they knew. I know, man, Andrew said quietly. I know, but they can't hurt you anymore. You're safe. We sat there for a long time, amidst the half-packed boxes of my old life, listening to the silence. And for the first time in 28 years, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The 6 months that followed were a reconstruction project. I was rebuilding my life on the ruins of the old one, brick by brick. The legal fight for the lake house was, to my surprise, short and decisive. My lawyer, Ryan, was a shark in a cheap suit. He didn't just threaten, he executed. My parents hired an expensive firm, thinking they could intimidate me with paperwork. But they had a fatal flaw in their defense: the truth. Aunt Marie provided a sworn affidavit. She detailed the conversation with Grandpa, the specific dates, and, crucially, she provided a copy of a letter Grandpa had written to her years ago, explicitly stating his intention for me to have the house. Faced with a losing case and the public humiliation of having their family's dirty laundry aired in probate court, my parents folded. Ryan called me on a Tuesday afternoon. It's done, he said. They settled. The title is being transferred to your name. They wanted a non-disclosure agreement, but I told them to pound sand. You own it, Joshua. Free and clear. I drove up to the lake that weekend. The house was dusty. It smelled of pine needles and old wood. It needed a new roof and the deck was rotting. But as I stood on the porch looking out at the water, I felt a sense of ownership I had never experienced before. This wasn't just a house. It was validation. It was Grandpa telling me, from beyond the grave, I saw you. You mattered. I didn't keep the house as a shrine. I renovated it. I used a chunk of my savings, money my father would have sneered at me for spending, to fix the roof, repaint the walls, and build a new dock. But the bigger change came from my career. A month after the incident, Lincoln, my CEO, called me into his office. He looked at me, really looked at me. "You've been different lately, Joshua," he said. "Is my work suffering?" I asked, instantly worried. "No," he smiled. "Your work is better. You're bolder. You stopped asking for permission to be right." He slid a file across his desk. "We're opening a new regional headquarters in Chicago. I need someone to run the marketing division there. It's a big step up, big salary bump, and it's 500 miles away from here." He knew. He didn't know the details, but he knew I needed distance. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. The move was a baptism. I packed up my apartment, sold the furniture that reminded me of my old life, and drove to Chicago. I found a new therapist, Dr. Evans, a sharp, compassionate woman who helped me put names to the ghosts that had haunted me. She explained the dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat. She helped me understand that my parents' inability to love me wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their own brokenness. I was healing. My autoimmune flare-ups became less frequent. It turns out, living in a constant state of fight or flight is really bad for your immune system. Who knew? My chosen family solidified. Andrew and I had a standing weekly video call where we played video games and trash-talked each other. Gabriel, the nurse, actually came to my housewarming party in Chicago. He had family in the city. I was no longer just surviving. I was building a life filled with purpose, peace, and people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. Just when I thought the chapter with my family was completely closed, a text message from an unknown number lit up my phone one rainy Tuesday evening. "Joshua, it's Caleb. Please, can we talk? I'm in Chicago. It's important." Every instinct screamed at me to block the number, to delete the message, to retreat into my fortress. Why open the door again? What could he possibly have to say? But a morbid curiosity, and perhaps a lingering thread of brotherly bond that hadn't been completely severed, won out. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. A neutral ground, public, safe. I got there early, sitting with my back to the wall, watching the door. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The Caleb I knew was cocky. He walked with a swagger, dressed in expensive clothes paid for by our parents, always looking around to see who was watching him. The man who walked in was thin. His clothes were worn, a simple hoodie and jeans. He looked tired. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He ordered a black coffee, no fancy latte, and sat opposite me. His hands were trembling slightly as he wrapped them around the warm cup. For a long moment, he just stared into his coffee. "Thanks for coming," he finally said, his voice quiet. "I'm not here to absolve you, Caleb," I said, my tone flat. "I'm here because I want to know why you're here." He looked up, and for the first time in his life, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Not the fake, performative sadness our mother used. This was real. It was heavy. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Josh, I am so sorry. For everything. Especially the dog." I just waited, my face a mask of stone. "You have to believe me," he said, his voice cracking. "I never really wanted that dog." I let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You're kidding me, right? You were obsessed with it. Mom said it was for your emotional well-being." "No," he insisted, shaking his head. "I was obsessed with what the dog represented. It was a test, Josh. A test. It was always a test. I'd ask for something bigger, more expensive, more ridiculous each time. The art school, the Porsche, the dog. And when they gave it to me, it was proof. Proof of what? Proof that they loved me more," he said, looking down, ashamed. "I knew it was sick, but I needed to know. When Mom came up with the idea for the Samoyed, I knew. I knew about your allergies. I remember the ambulance when we were kids. And you let them do it anyway. I wanted to see if they would," he confessed. "I wanted to see if they would choose me over you. And when they did, when they actually bought the dog. I felt like I had one. But then, at that dinner, seeing you choke, hearing you leave, he took a shaky breath. And then when Andrew called me that day, when he said you were dying, and I heard Dad say, "We'll go tomorrow," something broke in me, Josh. He described the house after I had gone. He called it a pressure cooker. Without you there to be the designated problem, he said. All of their anxiety, all of their dysfunction, it turned on me. They smothered me. They started criticizing me. Why aren't you happy, Caleb? We bought you the dog. We bought you the car. Why aren't you perfect? It was hell, he said. I finally understood. Being the golden child, it's just a different kind of prison. They don't love me, Josh. They love the idea of me. They love the trophy. He told me he had a massive fight with them 2 months ago. He had packed a bag and left. He left the Porsche in the driveway with the keys in the ignition. I'm working at a bookstore now, he said, a faint, proud smile touching his lips. I'm living in a studio apartment the size of a closet. I'm paying my own rent. It sucks. And I love it. And Snowy? I asked. I gave him to a family with 3 kids and a huge farm, he said. He's happy. He needed to run. I just needed to get away. He looked me straight in the eye. I know I have no right to ask. And I know I can't fix the past. But I don't want to be their pawn anymore. I want a chance to have a brother. A real one. Not a rival. The confession didn't magically erase 2 decades of pain. It didn't undo the damage to my lungs or my heart. But it shifted something inside me. I saw him not as the enemy, but as another casualty of their war. He had been given a different weapon, a different role, but he had been wounded all the same. They had crippled me with neglect, but they had crippled him with dependence. I'm not going to forgive Mom and Dad, I said clearly. I will never speak to them again. Good, Caleb said. Me neither. They're getting a divorce, by the way.